Hi everyone, I'm Steve Levy with Ipsos Canada, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 5th webinar in our Path Forward program. There's a few quick housekeeping measures to start with. First, you will all remain in listen-only mode. Now, you can submit questions by simply clicking on the question button, and that question will be submitted to our team in private. Time permitting, we will answer all of those questions, and in fact, we got a few pre-questions ahead of time. But if we do run out of time, we'll respond by email. Today's webinar will be recorded and it will be posted to our site in the next 48 hours, which you can review, download, and share. Now, this program of webinars is very much intended as a thought leadership platform that's going to cover a bunch of pretty important issues that we believe are relevant to both you and your organizations. Through a variety of tracking programs that we have in place here in Canada and in fact in 16 countries around the world, we've been seeing seismic shifts in both attitudes and claimed behaviors. Here in Canada, just in the last week or so, half of us still fear job loss. A third of us are finding it hard to keep up with paying our bills. And 8 in 10 of us are thinking of things like travel and attending events as being far too risky to be doing in the next month or so. Now that said, just in the past couple of weeks, we see sentiment softening somewhat. We see more optimism, more confidence, and 75% of Canadians now agree that we should be gradually opening up the economy where and when it is appropriate, rather than waiting and opening up all in one go. If you have any interest in learning more about some of these tracking systems, feel free to reach out to me at steve.levy@ipsos.com. Today, we have 2 webinar leads. We have Brad Griffin, who leads our qualitative practice, and Leslie Highback, who leads our customer experience practice. And they're going to share with you some of our thoughts about the journey, if you will, from empathy to impact, and how this may prepare us for whatever the future holds. Brad, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Steve gave us a great introduction, so I'm actually just going to jump right into my slides here. We know there's a lot of advice out there right now. Be patient. It's going to be a long road back to prosperity. Be focused on a few great ideas versus a scattering of half-baked concepts. Like we know what the great ideas are, of course. Lots of other advice. The best advice I've received is that this is the perfect time to promote curiosity in our organizations and among our teams. This is indeed the biggest story of our lifetime. We're seeing that the way we live, our routines, or in my case, lack thereof, are being reshaped. As our head of global behavioral science said, if brands want to be part of people's lives when we come out of this, they really need to be on the journey with them. What are the psychological dimensions that are shaping their behavior at any point in time? Indeed, now is the time to think about what trends we're seeing will be accelerated, which will fade away, which new ones will emerge. For example, will things focused on health, wellness, digitization, sustainability remain in focus, or will they become passé? If so, why and how? One of the things I'm most curious about is how the meaning of home is changing, and will some of those changing meanings remain? How will this affect our relationships, the amount of time and effort dedicated to specific tasks, the brands, products, services we interact with, how we interact with them? Of course, everyone, I'm assuming a lot on the phone, want to know when these things will happen. If they've already happened, when will they change back? And certainly a lot of those questions concern us as people first, because although on the phone we're clients, marketers, public servants, researchers, we're all really people first. but it also affects us in our work a lot. As such, we ask ourselves, will things like attention to hygiene continue with the same intensity or lack of intensity? Will people who discovered e-commerce enter newly opened stores, or will they continue to buy online? Will comfort food be our comfort for extended period of time, or will we move to that diet we're all considering? Will we use our cars again? If so, as frequently as before, less frequently, maybe more frequently. Maybe we're sharing cars in the future. Will we be more or less oriented towards environmentalism and sustainability, or will we park those things as we struggle to keep food on our tables and money in our pocket? These are the types of questions that I know are keeping me up at night, and I assume you as well. On a lighter note, one thing I hope that I'm sure of is that I won't have to help my wife color her hair again. Then again, maybe I will. Answering these questions really is not easy, and it'll require constant revisiting as the new world continues to take shape. But we do have a lot of tools and concepts to help us keep track. I'm sure you've seen a lot of these. Among these is empathy. For us, it's a critical concept, especially at the beginning of the process. If we don't empathize with people, our products and services don't offer support to people in real ways, chances are we won't succeed, or we won't have a chance to succeed as much as we should. Here's an exercise for all of us. I know everyone's on mute, so you can use the chat feature to play along, or just utter words in your head. But what do you see here? What one or two words come to mind when you look at this picture? For a lot of people, it tends to be excitement, joy, pride, love is a word we see a lot. What about now? What do you see? What kind of words come to mind? When we do this exercise, we still see love. We have added items like concern, health, heartbreak in some cases. What changed? Well, of course, it wasn't really a fair exercise. We didn't show you the whole picture. All the context, or a lot of the context, was missing. We know that understanding personal, cultural, and social context is the best instrument we have to understand the real emotions behind human behavior and experience. And they're necessary if we're to understand the real implications for our brands and our businesses. We can't just scratch the surface and go with the first picture we see. Here's a quote I've liked for a while now. It's from the CEO of the Association of National Advertisers. It reads, "In this time of crisis, brands are exploring every possible means to remain helpful and relevant to their customers, and making empathy a key part of their decision-making process is a wise approach." Before we unpack this further, a few more questions just to plant in your brain as we go through this presentation. Ask yourself, how are you gearing up to maintain an empathetic contact with stakeholders? And if you are, how are you going to evolve that thinking? What are the questions you're asking yourself or your teams? And are you asking the right questions of people? And I stress the word people because I think it's important to look at people before their customers. Ultimately, we have to get to the customer point of view for certain. But starting with them as people is important, because more often than not, they're just living their lives versus exclusively interacting with our products and services and brands. We have a construct built around empathy to add or create value for the people we serve. It's centered on think, feel, and do. In research, or as researchers, we're really good at the think part, and we do a pretty good job of helping clients with the do part. Sometimes we lose sight of the feel. It's certainly a large part of what we do in IUU with Qual. As humans, I think most of us are tuned in to the emotional part of empathy. I feel your pain. Oh, sorry. I feel your pain is a statement I think we've all uttered. Sometimes that's all that's required, needed, or even wanted. As we consider empathy in a business context, however, it's important to also understand cognitive empathy. That takes us from I feel your pain to understanding what that pain means, to using that understanding to help in a meaningful way, which is really what we want to do. From a qualitative point of view, empathy can be articulated and understood in a multitude of human-centric, participant-led research tools. Things like online communities, where the level of engagement and insight that we're seeing is really unprecedented. People really want to talk. They certainly want to talk about specific topics, but more importantly, they want to talk to people like themselves and others that they don't know to understand the human condition in broader sense. Using an online community and a bespoke platform such as it is perfect for empathetic dialogue, not just between us as researchers and clients and them, but again, between themselves as people are living the lives that we want to understand. We've always done a lot of digital ethnography, but it's really ramped up recently as we seek to unpack people's new reality, especially in their home, which has become their office, their daycare, their school. I know I've been humbled by trying to figure out grade 6 math while simultaneously doing my job and helping people do theirs. We're also curating insights and delivering them in different ways now. Heavy use of video, storytelling, and workshops to bring life to life. I guess at this point, probably a lot of people are asking, this is great, but does an empathetic approach actually pay the bills and keep the lights on? There's been some great work done on the ROI associated with empathy, or in that case, ROE. Belinda Palmer, who's the CEO of the empathy business, has shown that there's a direct link between empathy and commercial success. Businesses are more profitable, productive, when they act ethically, treat their staff well, and communicate better with customers. In a 2019 survey of 150 CEOs, 80% of them recognize empathy as a key to success. This is a great quote from Tim Cook, who's the CEO of Apple. He was talking to his employees. Very direct and to the point. People will try to convince you that you should keep empathy out of your career. Don't accept this false premise. Right, so everyone gets this. Empathy matters. I'm sure someone would struggle to disagree with that in an open forum. But do we really get it? We see that while the vast majority of CEOs feel their organizations are indeed empathetic, only half of their employees feel their CEOs are empathetic. So I think we've all understood the need to talk the talk, but now we need to start backing this up with real actions. Another question for you, the leaders, those who are aspiring to be leaders, those who are looking to their leaders, is what can you do moving forward to close this kind of gap? Figuring this out will not only make you an employer of choice, but will show customers that you're indeed an empathetic organization. Leslie will talk a little bit about how important that is. We also know intuitively being better connected to the real people that interact with our brands, products, and services makes sense. It's interesting that on the one hand, technology has opened up so much information and data about people. It's really unprecedented. But successful leaders have recognized that in the wake of AI, we need a renewed focus on the power of human connections and bonding. Forward thinkers like Jack Ma at Alibaba and Satya Nadella at Microsoft, which interestingly are both tech super monsters, have openly declared empathy a critical factor in future survival and success. An anecdotal story I like to tell, I was at a conference once. It was hosted by, or one of the sessions was sponsored by Microsoft, and there was two Microsoft employees on stage. One, a programmer, data engineer, heavy tech. The other one was a sociologist, which that in and of itself was interesting to see. Microsoft had that capability on their team. And they were tasked with arguing or debating how they were structuring their kids' lives to future success. And what was interesting, the sociologist was all in on tech and math and computers and programming. Basically, that was the future. His son, in that case, really needed to tap into that to find the success he wanted. The data engineer was actually saying tech is ubiquitous. It's a given. Really, what will separate people from each other are the social sciences, the ability to understand people and tell the human side of the story. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer there, but it's fascinating to see an organization like Microsoft grappling with that. Our empathy program has three key components and one overriding principle as we help clients navigate this concept. The first component is to incite a shift within your organization by creating excitement with your teams and engaging them directly around an empathetic approach to business. We have highly successful engagement training summits to help accomplish this. Second, we need to connect and immerse. Form connections with employees and customers alike, and even between employees and customers. Observe real-life moments. Listen intently. Not just in a moment in time, but continuously. It's great to do a focus group to understand where people are at, but we don't know what things were like just before that, and we don't always know how things will change just after that, especially in times like these. Again, this is where tools like communities and ethnography play a role. Next, you have to act and create value. Share what you learned and transfer those learnings into action. Use workshops, living curation, and go through the cycle of learning and relearning over and over again. Challenge yourself to do that. The overriding principle of the program is to always be on. This is a concept with a beginning, but no end. It needs to become something that's woven into the fabric of your organization. So thanks for listening to me. Lindsay's going to carry this conversation on. She'll walk you through what companies are currently doing and can be doing to use empathy and emotional connections to impact and strengthen their customer relationships and ultimately keep organizations moving forward. Leslie? Apologies. Leslie?
Thanks, Brad. I guess I could have called you something different there too, but that's okay. so thank you very much. There's no doubt that the world as we know it has definitely changed drastically since this crisis began. As a human race, we generally, though, are very resistant to change. Even though we like to think we're very innovative and forward-thinking, people do resist that concept of change, and companies need to be empathetic to this. So it provides us with a moment of truth between brands, employees, and customers. And to survive, companies are going to need to go further in understanding their customers' needs and their expectations, but also how well their employees can deal with all of those changes. Many organizations have actually been in survival mode since this crisis began, and they've taken the opportunity to do different things and to stand out by using empathy. And this is generally in all of the global, so we've done a bit of a search around the globe in our customer experience division and looked for what companies have been doing everywhere as they've dealt with this crisis. And this idea of empathy has manifested itself in three different ways. One is caring for customers. Leading brands have focused on implementing things like health and safety measures to take care of their customers. They've found ways to help them in better managing finances and to just get through this crisis. It's also about caring for employees. Because social estrangement is not just about caring for those people and for customers, but it's also about protecting the employees and their families. And it's about caring for the community. And in some cases, that's in a much broader sense of country and world. This crisis also presents itself as an opportunity for companies to operate according to their values, to focus less on competition right now, but to really act in the best interest of all citizens. And here are a couple of examples, and these are just a few of many, of how some companies around the world have been dealing with this crisis and showing the empathy they've had for their customers, their employees, and for their communities. So for example, in Mexico, Mexico Banorte has introduced flexible payments for their customers, whereas T-Mobile in the U.S. has provided unlimited data. That's a common thing. We've seen that in Canada as well. In Germany, Aldi has actually taken and hired employees from McDonald's who had been laid off. And Tesco actually decided that they would take some of their older workers and pay for them to stay home for 12 weeks to make sure that they stayed safe. Companies like Waitrose and Partners in the UK delivered care packages to healthcare workers in the UK, and BCP Bank in Peru donated money to vulnerable families. And I know we've seen lots of different actions like that in many different countries and in Canada as well, but it just goes to show you that customers are actually taking notice. And we know that they're doing that because as part of one of our Ipsos syndicated studies in financial services, we added some specific COVID-related questions to help us better understand the mindset of the Canadian population. We asked Canadians to tell us, top of mind, which company they thought was doing the best job of handling this crisis. And the companies that came top of mind obviously were those, for the most part, that have been providing essential services. So it's not surprising that we see things like the grocery companies, the banks, people in companies where customers can still interact, topping out the list. But there's a couple things, though, that stand out here, and these are the list of the top 15 over the last 6 weeks, and we've been in field every single week with this information. So what is interesting, though, is the Government of Canada. I'm not sure I ever thought I would expect to see a government organization being in a top list of well-thought-of service providers. I also know that Amazon being at number 12 was a little bit of a surprise to me because thinking about all of the online shopping that's going on right now, you would think they would be higher up in the list. What's also interesting to note here is that what you do and how you do it can make a difference because the difference between the top-rated company, Loblaw companies, and the number 2 company, Costco, is 2 to 3 times higher. That the top-of-mind mentions by consumers are going to that Loblaw companies. So why is it? Well, if you think about some of the approaches that Loblaw has taken, and there's a lot of great examples out there, but in this particular case, we wanted to understand why the company was showing up week after week as number 1. And if you think about the idea of what we saw globally with people caring for customers, they've done a number of different things to make sure that they had implemented social distancing protocols, put limits on products that can be bought so that there's enough around for everyone. Enhancing the pickup model and adding special hours for seniors and healthcare workers. For their employees, they were very quick to add extra dollars to the wages of frontline employees to make sure that they had extra in this time of crisis. And also to make sure that they paid employees who got sick and guaranteed them their wages. And from a community perspective, they very quickly also donated $5 million to ensure that food and health essentials got to the Canadians who were most vulnerable. Now, by no means is Loblaw the only company that are doing those things. And in fact, you could argue that many of their competitors may have actually been first to field with some of these things. But when you combine the combination of all of this with the empathy and the well-known Canadian icon in Galen Weston bringing these messages together and communicating regularly, that's what we believe has caused the difference in why Loblaw has been coming up top of mind. And you can also look at this from the other side of the perspective or the other side of the coin. We also in this study asked consumers to tell us a company that they thought was not doing so well at handling the crisis. And in the very first weeks, one brand definitely stood out, and that was EB Games. We believe that is largely because of the fact that they had a lot of negative press about the way that they had consumers coming to purchase a new release of a couple of new games that everyone really wanted to make sure they had. What's interesting about this is I know from personal experience that my local EB Games actually set appointments for customers to come in and buy the games so that they could actually make sure they were maintaining social distancing. But you can see that consumers got ahead of themselves and were so excited about these new games that they actually didn't necessarily follow all the procedures, giving EB Games maybe a bit of a bad rap. But everyone has a story right now of a brand or a company that they think has done an exceptional job during this time, or one that hasn't maybe met their expectations. And it's interesting in these times of crisis when there is so much emotion in people's experiences that people are going to remember, at least for some amount of time, whether or not, or how they felt and how they were treated, and whether or not they'll go back and purchase from those brands in the future. So it's interesting, though, that because a lot of companies have had to close their doors for the time being, it's important to remember Albert Einstein's theory that crisis provides great opportunity. And so as businesses start to reopen, they're going to need to adapt and find new ways to make sure that they're meeting their customers' expectations. And just as companies respond to the new challenges of the crisis, customers are going to continue to change their behavior and their attitudes. The usual and routine activities that gave customers confidence no longer apply in the new environment. And as everyone starts to reopen, companies are going to need to continuously reinvent themselves to meet those shifting needs of customers and expectations. And it's going to be a hard decision to decide which is the right path to take, because there are going to be times of trial and error where you're going to have to, go down one path and maybe rejig a little bit and go down a slightly different path. And every organization and industry is going to have things happen at different times. So for example, retail might be much faster to come back online than, say, airlines and the hospitality industry. And customers and companies are starting to ask us, how do we know what we should do next? For example, if you think of a bank or a grocery store where they have plexiglass barriers have been implemented and put in place, do you remove those? And if so, when? Will customers need to wear masks? And if so, for how long? So companies are going to have to continue to deal with the what ifs, also of whether or not there's a second pandemic. Now, so far I've talked a lot about very functional aspects of the experience, but what about the emotional aspects? So we know, even before this pandemic, that brands were already facing a customer experience gap, with companies often not delivering experiences that either matched or exceeded customer expectations of the brand promise. And most organizations knew how important delivering on your promise was to your business. In fact, in a 2019 global study in 85 countries with over 1,300 executives, it was found that almost 9 in 10 executives indicated that customer experience was the #1 differentiator in the marketplace. But a quarter admitted that they were dissatisfied with the experiences they were delivering. So even though they knew it was important, they still were not meeting the needs of their customers. And the necessity of ensuring that experience delivered meets that brand promise still remains just as critical as ever in these crazy times, because you want to make sure that you build stronger relationships and not break them. And there are so many different places that you can have gaps in your experience. Just to think of a couple, you can talk about the gap that you might have between service standards that you set as an organization and how well your employees deliver on them. Or you could have a gap in the experiences you're designing for your customers and what their expectations of those experiences are. So it's really, really critical to get these right. And we know that this matters. In another one of our global Ipsos studies, we were able to show that 66% of respondents cited personal experience as a major influencer on how they make decisions about the brands they choose to do business with. Friends and family also matter when influencing brand decisions at about 35%, but it's not nearly as much as that person's own personal experiences they've had in the past. And where we always think social media has such a play in the world, that actually rounded out the top 3 at 16%. So it is super important that we get these experiences right as often as possible. So to close the gap to stay close to your customers, companies really need to do three things. They need to make sure that they're understanding the new needs of customers. And times are chaotic, but it's by systematically exploring how customer behavior and needs are influenced by a variety of evolving elements, brands can adjust and model their offering to meet those customer needs. For example, for many companies, the closure of their brick and mortar locations has meant that they've needed to shift to a more online or alternative channel. But understanding that some customers are just not comfortable with those channels, companies have to react to find ways to help their customers and hold their hand. Next, you have to adapt them. So now that you know what the problem is and you understand what the problem is, you have to find ways to actually focus and adapt to those. So this means that for many companies, you have to find quick solutions, giving new meaning right now to the definition or concept of agile organization. If I go back to our example a second ago about customers feeling uncomfortable with online services, a company can do a few things to make that better for customers. For example, they can redesign their online experiences to make it easier to navigate. They can provide additional online support or instructions for better instructions for teaching people how to get signed up for the first time. So retailers have adapted their experiences already by indicating on the floor, for example, in stores, how far distance is for people to actually make sure that you've got enough space between customers or between customers and employees. And we also have a lot more visual cues that have become important. So I know myself going into a grocery store, and I've been into two in the last week, and one of them, for example, I watched the person wipe down every single cart. That was a visual cue to me that that cart was safe and healthy and clean for me to use. That's a different cue than if you just see the carts all stacked up one after the other, but you see no sign of anyone cleaning them. These are the types of ways that customers or companies can actually adjust their behaviors and their processes to better help customers. And finally, it's going to be about anticipating the next step. What is this going to need to look like in the future? Because it is going to change. When do you have to stop actually showing customers that you're wiping down those shopping carts? These are the questions that companies are going to have to answer. But we've talked a lot about empathy and all of the different brand pieces, but customer experience starts with people because empathy is often related to people. Customers make decisions every day using their experiences as we've shown. So we talked a little bit about how one of the ways you can grow an impactful customer experience is by making sure you're setting expectations of your brand promise. But you also have to make sure that once you understand what those promises are, that you deploy them correctly through employees. And then finally, you need to have the right ingredients to drive strong relationships. And those are both functional and emotional or relational components. So how can you ensure that all your employees deliver a brand-worthy experience? We had this example of a case study, and just to show how important it is that you actually do this. This was a situation with a call center, and you can see on the top left-hand side there's three dots. These three dots of speed, efficiency, and early call customer ID validation are really showing that these are the things that the call center staff and the company thought were important to customers. Of course, you're calling in. You know, you've got a problem to deal with. Why wouldn't we want to make sure that you're validated really early on so we can get to the business of helping you with your problem? But when we actually went to talk to customers in this case and actually stopped to say, what's important to you, it was very clear and apparent that customers really were calling into a call center because they had an issue or a problem to solve. They weren't really worried about being identified and validated at the first part of the call. They wanted to share their experience. They wanted to get it off their chest. And so in reality, empathy and friendliness were the two more important things for them to play into this experience. So just by shifting things a little bit in a call, the company was able to very quickly allow their employees to show empathy to their customers and to actually make it a better experience that matched the customer's expectations. And the employees had a role in this. And so it's super important that when you're developing new experiences, that you look at the customer and mirror the employee's experience as well to make sure that you can more effectively close the customer experience gap. That means you need to look at things like the back office perspective. Are they able to deliver what the front office needs to be able to deliver your customer expectations? Does the front line have the support they need? Do they have the right understanding of what you as an organization are trying to accomplish and how you're trying to accomplish it? And are they feeling that they're actually delivering on it? And are your customers actually feeling that you're delivering on the brand promise and their expectations of you as a brand? These are all lots of things that you have to consider for sure. And all of this is important because the emotions matter. Employees are that face of your organization, and they're an integral part of how emotionally engaged customers are, because emotions are what sticks. Now you might say though too, okay, I don't have an industry that's face-to-face. I'm in a digital perspective. How do I make these emotional connections? There are still ways that that can happen as well. When you think of examples like Amazon and how well they've made connections, or Zappos with shoe purchases, there are ways to drive engagement and emotional connection to your brand, even when you don't have those face-to-face experiences, but it definitely makes it easier when you do. So what is it that helps to create an emotional bond? So a few years ago, we did some research globally in regards to how we could quantify whether or not there's an emotional connection with your consumers and what impact that had. So we've been able to identify and measure through a series of questions, and it's about 8 or 10 statements that you would add to a survey, whether or not your customers are unfulfilled, meaning that they are not, you're not meeting their needs from a functional or an operational standpoint, as well as they're not connected to you in any emotional capacity. The middle section in the sort of purple-blue color is customers that are functionally satisfied. These are the ones that the experience met what they needed, it was okay, and you operationally or functionally satisfied their needs. And the final tier is, in the green, is those that are emotionally attached. Now we have found that consumers to be emotionally attached first have to be functionally satisfied. So that top tier are people who you've met their needs, but you've also found a way to have them emotionally engage with you. And you can see by the numbers on the right-hand side of the screen that this has a huge impact. If you look at customer preference for brands when there is an emotional connection, that rate's at a 52 versus a 21 if they're functionally satisfied. You see similar or even greater gaps when you look at Net Promoter Scores, or the NPS one in the middle. And also that likelihood to continue to do business with you. Having an emotional connection helps to guarantee that your consumers are going to be dealing with you for a longer period of time and that they appreciate your brand. And emotionally attached customers are also more likely to be forgiving. Again, as part of this study, we've been able to identify the fact that, as you can see here on the right-hand side, that customers who are emotionally attached, over 55% of them will be willing to forgive a brand if they made a mistake. And in these times right now, in this crisis, where brands are having to continually change their direction and course, and also keep trying and retrying and reinventing new things, that's going to become even more important than ever. So being able to be emotionally connected with your customers is critical. And as Brad said earlier, emotional connection is all part of empathy as well. More recently, and actually this is hot off the press, we were able to identify in a global study with over 10,000 consumers in 9 different sectors what we consider to be the forces of building strong relationships, and that's actually building the emotional connection. So this was follow-up work from the first piece, which I just showed you, about the importance of an emotional connection. And the 6 forces that we've found that will drive these stronger relationships include fair treatment, certainty, control, status, belonging, and enjoyment. And if you look at, for example, control and certainty, that's going to be of greater importance right now when there is so much that's unknown to consumers. So for them to have a feeling of control and certainty in the interactions they have with you is going to be a much stronger driver of relationships at this point in time. Or if you think about the importance of belonging for a company like Tom's Shoes to millennials and Gen Z. These are generations that are often driven by a sense of belonging and how well your causes resonate with them personally. Tom's customers can relate to the fact that every time they buy a pair of shoes, a pair is also donated on their behalf. These are the types of things that can have and make a difference to brands. So with these new questions and these new forces, we can also actually understand as well how well these new battlegrounds are in play and where the barriers are and where the drivers are. So in some cases, you'll find that the red are the barriers, so fair treatment and certainty and control tend to be more of a barrier to building a relationship, whereas things like status and belonging tend to be more of a driver of building a stronger relationship. But this can vary, again, by industry, and it can vary by generation, as the example I just gave with Tom's shoes. So understanding how your brand is doing in this regard, as well as how well you are comparing in each of these forces to your competitors, can really give you a clear picture of where you need to focus your attention. And we can also give the strength of how much each of these have an impact on your relationship building. So for example, on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see the relationship strength. That relationship strength is driven by all of the 6 forces, which you can see here in the various colors, so belonging, status, enjoyment, fair treatment, control, and certainty. And these are general right now, so control and certainty are a little bit further back, but they're more driven by all the functional aspects, which are these gray dots. The size of the gray dot also has indication of how much importance it has on each of those different elements. So you can see everything is interrelated. It's not as simple as, a more old school type of driver analysis. You really need to understand how each different element of your experience interacts with one another. So there's a lot at stake. Meeting customers' functional and relational needs in these difficult times is going to have positive consequences on building emotional attachments and goodwill for your customers. So that means that brands need to strive to really understand what customers are looking for right now, adapt to it, and then anticipate the future needs, because none of us really know what's coming right now, as these are very much unprecedented times. And we truly need to understand the forces that are in play in customers' minds. By doing so, and now that we know what some of those are, we can actually help organizations in designing experiences that are going to help them to build stronger emotional connections and stronger relationships, giving a bit of a competitive advantage. So from a next step perspective, you need to be able to maintain constant communication with your customers. So this includes things like listening to them and understanding what their needs are and how they're changing. Comparing yourself to what your competitors are doing and how you can learn from that and from your global partners. And to question everything that you're doing, to understand that are you really meeting those needs and questioning how well you're actually communicating with your customers. And probably one of the more important things you need to do is promise what you can deliver. This is an opportunity now to be able to say reset some of the expectations of your brand and redesign your brand promise to meet what customers are looking at from you. So by figuring out what it is you can deliver and making sure that you can actually meet those expectations to your customers is going to have a huge impact on how your brand moves forward. And start getting ready for what's next. There's been a lot of talk about different phases in the industries and in the sectors of what's next. There seems to be a sense that the first phase was kind of survival. The next one is how do we adapt to things as we reopen, but fully knowing that that's probably not the final stage, and that, when there's a vaccine available or we have some other way to better deal with this current crisis, we're going to need to know what's coming, and we're going to have to continually think and rethink those options. And finally, when you're going through all of these different steps, it's about bringing empathy and emotion into the mix, because we know and we've seen and we can show you and we've shown you that this all has an impact on how well and how strong you can build relationships with your customers. So in summary, brands, basically, we need to understand that now that we've sort of overcome this initial paralysis, the more opportunities our brands and businesses have to get out well on the other side of this tunnel, There's social phenomena happening everywhere around us. We need to learn from the experiences of the countries that have gone through this a little ahead of us. We need to start thinking about how we can use that information to help us with the challenges that are ahead. We need to make sure that brands have an understanding of the role they're playing in addressing these new needs and providing reassurance to customers. That means sometimes it's going to be more about the community than about commercialism. And finally, making sure that the brands provide products and services that really provide that opportunity to show the empathy and build emotional connections with your customers. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leslie and Brad. If we can get you guys both back on camera. There are a number of questions that came in during the session, and in fact a few that we received for the session. I'll let each of you jump in with which one of you want to answer these questions. First question is related to the new reality and the fact that a number of people, and in this case I think one of you mentioned that the world has changed drastically. Do you guys believe that this is the case? Or do you think that by and large people have short memories and that most things will snap back to the way they were?
I'll take that one, Steve. I think it's a little bit of both. There are definitely going to be things that are going to snap back into place the way they were before. For example, I mentioned ED Games earlier. And when we saw that they had some negative top-of-mind mention of how they were dealing with their current situations, we found very quickly that their name dropped off the list in future weeks because it was an in-the-moment, bad press, but people forgot about it. But if then you also look at a different example, and if you think about some of the special questions we've added into our CSI financial services study, we found that people have definitely indicated that they're moving away from the branches to some degree and more likely and willing to use online banking instead. But we're starting to see that shift back a little bit, and you can see that, and we fully anticipate that over time, you'll probably have much higher online usage than you did in the past, but it may not stay at the level it is right now as things start to go back to normal. So it is a little bit of a mix of both.
Brad, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think Leslie nailed it. The only thing I would add is drastic, I guess, is to be determined because we won't know whether something's drastic or not until we see the extent to which it's rebounded. But I think the best term that I've heard being used is we're at best going to enter a new normal, if not a completely new. And it'll just be a matter of time before we start to really understand and unpack what that looks like.
Yeah, I guess whatever words we all choose to describe the future, there are pundits on both sides of the equation about whether or not there's a new normal or whether or not, I guess, it'll snap back. For the 106 people who are still with us, I think Brad's camera's not on because his kids are sucking bandwidth out of his household. But he is still there and he will still answer questions. The second question that we have actually relates to advertising and the fact that, as this person says, there's a lot of empathetic advertising out there. It seems to all say the same thing. It's hard to distinguish one ad from another. It might be empathetic, and this person goes on to say, but is it working? Is it driving sales?
Yeah, I can take that, and I probably won't do it as much justice as our next webinar speaker, Ted Doring, when he talks about the creative fight back. But I know I've seen some of the montages that highlight how stock some of the ads have been. A lot of them start with some soft music, stock images, some reassuring words that the brand understands, and then faster paced music to end. And suggest the brand will be with you as you go through this. In fairness to the advertisers and the creators, there likely wasn't much time to put something much else together. But Steve, you actually spoke about this in your intro. We have seen other ads with messages directly from CEOs that mention their employees, their core consumers' concerns, and the specific actions they're taking to help. And we know, and Leslie spoke about this as well, that those ads are performing quite well. And even in terms of organizations that are struggling right now, and there may not be a lot of opportunity immediately in front, I just saw a few minutes before this webinar, actually, Fairmont Hotels released a great campaign saying the art of waiting, and they really tapped into the human emotion, things that we're all feeling and wanting but just aren't there yet. And again, I think that really speaks to that empathetic approach to things. So while probably not going to drive sales tomorrow because hotels aren't there yet, it suggests that they're in touch with those types of things.
So here's a question from, I would guess this is from a bank. This person says, how do you reconcile corporate empathy against the practical business need to drive short-term results?
I'll take that one, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's about finding a way to combine those elements. You know, we talked about companies around the world putting their programs in place to show how they're, caring for their customers, their employees, and for their communities. So these programs, when you package them together and when you promote them well and you make sure that people know what you're doing, will likely result in a lot more top-of-mind presence. And then hopefully if you're top of mind, you're also going to then drive, short-term sales. So we see how it's been working. I gave the example for Loblaw, how, they're very much come top of mind. But we've seen it in other things as well. And it's really a result of one of the forces we discussed, which is that sense of belonging. So, customers want to purchase from companies that are like-minded in their desire for the greater good. So, when you're meeting those needs, you're also going to have an impact on your business as a whole, whether it's short-term or long-term.
Okay. It's a question about relationships. This person says, you talked about people building stronger relationships. Of course, we're all thinking in terms of building relationships, but how can you build these relationships in a digital world? Okay.
Well, I can take that one as well if that's okay, and Brad, if you have anything to add. I didn't show a particular slide today, but again, on our global research on research, we look at not just one industry, but we look at multiple industries, and we look at the amount of, or the strength of emotional connections within those industries. And surprisingly, what you see at the top of the rank with the strongest ones are grocery and other retailers, as well as financial services institutions and online retailers. Also score very high on emotional connections. And I mentioned before Amazon, even though they weren't maybe as top of mind in our study, they tend to have a very good emotional connection with their consumers. And if you think of Zappos with the shoe buying experience, they also do that. So regardless of whether you're digital or whether you're face-to-face, there are opportunities to build strong connections, especially if you're meeting the promise of your brand. Because people's expectations are often driven by, or their experiences are driven by their expectations. So if they expect a different, digital experience, they're not going to expect the same interaction as it is face-to-face. So just making sure that you meet those promises and those expectations is really critical.
All right, so
yeah, and I would only add to that corporate empathy would include how you are treating all stakeholders, including your employees. And now more than ever, I believe consumers are watching. So even if that maybe isn't driving short-term results, it definitely is going to build equity for you positively or negatively into the future. So corporate empathy implies not just towards consumers, but just an overall embodiment of it. And I believe that's important for short, medium, long-term results.
That's a good segue to another question that is in fact about people and employees. This person says, brands are just people working to fulfill a promise. How must brands communicate their people policies to the public, and what tools does the public have to authenticate these commitments? Long question, but who wants to take that one?
Well, I think it's a very true statement. When you understand what the promise is, It's about whether or not you can deliver on it. That's the most important. But if you think about some of the companies and the way they've been communicating, a lot of organizations have known that the way to get someone in the door is to make them feel comfortable and confident that their safety and security is being taken care of. And so there's been a lot of good examples of companies promoting that, whether it's an email to a customer who's on their mailing list, whether it's in any communications through their loyalty programs, or even outside of the stores, while you're waiting in line. The way that companies are promoting what they're doing is actually having some impact, I think, on whether or not people are going to interact with them. But the biggest critical factor, I think, comes back to that delivery. So you have to make sure that your employees know what those standards are, not just your consumers.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Brad, for your time. Our next webinar in this program is on May 25th. I'd highly recommend that you all join this one. It's at 1:30 when Ted Doring will be sharing some fascinating insights that we have about the creative fight back. Ted and his team have been testing some of the commercials that we talked about earlier that have come into being through the COVID period. I'll be then following that with a moderated discussion with Ted and Brett McIntosh, the president of Publicis in Toronto. If you haven't already registered, please do. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.